looking forward to just the next few minutes just being very heart-to-heart communication of where I'm coming from. This is really the summary of my WalkAway story. For those that don't know, the WalkAway movement is something that I've been watching a lot recently over YouTube. There's a lot of people, largely from the United States, leaving the Democratic Party, going often towards the Republican Party, turning from basically left wing to right wing. But just as the years go by, cracks start to appear in the thinking processes, and the shells come off, and they've dropped it behind them and changed their sides. And that's the sort of journey that I've found myself taking. I've titled this Information Time Bomb. I'll explain a little bit more about that towards the end. After I've explained some of these other points, it'll make a bit more sense. My background, very briefly, is, let's make it clear, I live in Sydney, Australia. I'm not in the United States, but this is a very common progression around the world, I think, of people starting out with good intentions, basically left-wing orientated, trying to help the underprivileged in different ways, thinking kind things about them. But through one means or another, the thinking processes just go more and more toxic as time goes by, until you just can't sustain it any longer, and you've got to work towards a different approach. Just to explain, my parents were, call them upper middle class, right-wingish. I disregarded their attitudes primarily because I thought, you've got money, therefore, you're being selfish. That's why you think the way you do. You want to vote governments in that are kind to free enterprise and tax and all that kind of thing. I'm 62. I'm on my second marriage. That extended even to listening to my second wife, who's also a fairly successful businesswoman. She was more right-wing than I was, and I would likewise sort of disregard what she said as, you're a business person, therefore you think this way. It doesn't really mean you've got a good thinking process. But as I say, as time goes by, it sinks in, and I'll explain in a bit more detail shortly just what were the problems. I'm quite nervous about this, because this topic, as all these other WalkAway people as well, as they say, very sad divisions inside their families and friends. People lose family and friend because they're coming out with a different political opinion. And unfortunately, as much as the left say they're tolerant and everything else, it's completely the opposite. They're completely intolerant. As a late teenager, I became a Christian. So right through my adult life, I've been a dedicated Christian, and that thinking process as being a Christian has driven my major emphasis. And it was with that background that I started off on a left-leaning basis. It's interesting, as a Christian, many Christians can be on the full spectrum, left and right. And whenever you're dealing with another Christian, whatever part of the spectrum you are, you've at least got a foundational aspect to it. You basically know the other person has a caring attitude. They might have come up with different conclusions, but you've got a good, trusting place to start from. You get involved with Twitter and other people that have not got a religious or a Christian background. They simply don't have that trust in a conversation. Straight away, they think you're bigoted. They think you're narrow-minded. And to be honest, there's a lot of people out there from the left who think that religion itself, whatever flavour it is completely the problem with the world today. The opposite is the truth. Just a little quote that you may have heard, and there's many versions of it, but basically it goes like this. If you're not left-leaning when you're 20, you don't have a heart, and if you're not right-leaning when you're 40, you don't have a brain. That quote has been around for a little while. There's different forms of it. The ages vary. Obviously, the terminology changes a little bit. And I should just say that because I'm coming from Australia, I've got to be a little bit careful with terminology, particularly the word liberal, because it means different things to people in the United States versus in other countries. So perhaps I'll just try to stick with left and right, and hopefully people understand where I'm coming from. Left being basically larger government, nanny state, social security, looking after people with no limits and little oversight. And the right being a little bit more capitalistic, smaller government, more individual freedom, individual responsibility, and another important component which I'll add as well in a moment, which is respect for authority, which is very much lacking in the left. That's sort of the quick summary. I've just got a few points in front of my eyes here, so excuse me if I'm just looking down from time to time. I've got a little Bible passage here, Matthew 7 verses 13. I'll just read it, it's only short. Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. This is really a Bible verse that should discourage people from thinking that safety in numbers. And I feel this is one of the mistakes that the left is making, because, especially among younger people, because all of your friends are thinking this way, they have these particular set of ideas. You're in good company, they're your friends, you trust them. The more people that agree with you, chances are you're wrong. And that's why people often talk about this term echo chambers. So you surround yourself with, can be family, but particularly friends, colleagues, even news articles and your favourite journalists and everything else. They're all feeding you the same thing. You feel comfortable with it. It agrees with what you feel inside. You could all be wrong. And another issue with the left is that you hear this term social justice warrior. So justice becomes really one of the only planks that all their ideas are based on, justice. Now, as a Christian, Christians basically understand intrinsically that justice plays a part with the Christian foundation, but it's a very tough taskmaster. You cannot live by justice. There's other things, love and compassion and understanding of your own faults, and obviously an understanding of other people's faults. Now, as these little bad emphasis, you don't notice them so much at the beginning, but as you live with these ideas, and year in and year out, they become less and less satisfying and more obviously dangerous. Put it in a Christian context, justice is a two-edged sword. The cancel culture at the moment is, if you find anybody that's making mistakes, their whole life must be ruined. They must lose their job, they must lose their marriage, they must lose their reputation. And it's coming back to bite people. There's a lot of people recently, everybody was happy a little while ago, people on the right were being found out for different things and being cancelled. Okay, time goes by and more people on the left are also being found that way. Even some of the great heroes of the left are found to have soiled hands and really suffering from cancel culture. It can just be simply rumours, and people's lives can be cancelled. I don't need to go into examples and things, but we've seen many situations like that It happens regularly, and it seems to be happening increasingly more often. Almost inevitably, as I talk about becoming more right-wing, people attribute selfish and bad motives, not giving anybody the benefit of the doubt. And I know that this is happening right now as I say these things. What about Genesis 1, verses 26? I'll just read a few things in here. We know it, but unfortunately I have to reinforce it. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. So God has invested his own image in man and women. He has an interest in their creation, a vested interest in our reputation. Watch out for this one. Let's go straight into it. Matthew 5, verse 21. "You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'You shall not murder.'" This is Jesus speaking, of course, in the New Testament. "You shall not murder, and anyone who murders shall be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, 'Raka,' in other words, criticizing them, is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, 'You fool,' will be in danger of the fire of hell." This is something that the left has completely forgotten. The complete lack of respect, not only for authority, which I mentioned previously, but for their fellow human beings. The criticism, the swearing, the cancel culture that I was talking about. But God has created man and woman in his own image, and you criticize your fellow man, you're criticizing God's handiwork, and he won't tolerate it. And that verse couldn't be more straightforward than that. It's absolutely extreme. And Jesus does this repeatedly. He comes and he rewrites the moral code to such a high level, it's in an impossible level. He's not lying, it's true, but it just demonstrates that justice on its own it's beyond us. It is absolutely beyond us. We need another solution. Jesus is the solution. His sacrifice for us is absolutely mandatory. We cannot survive in a justice-only world. Just get over it, okay? I can't and you can't. Don't fool yourself. Respect for authority. Let's just keep going. I just love these Bible passages. There's a number of passages in the Bible and in the New Testament which are instructive to respect authority. But I just pulled this one out because I think it's a little bit more interesting. It's an example of somebody respecting authority in the moment. This is Acts 23. It's the Apostle Paul. He's in front of a Jewish court, and I'll just read these few verses. Paul looked straight at the Sanhedrin, which is the Jewish court, and said, "My brothers, I have fulfilled my duty to God in all conscience to this day." At this, the high priest Ananias ordered those standing near Paul to strike him on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, "God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. You sit there to judge me according to the law, yet you yourselves violate the law by commanding that I be struck." So he's sort of standing up for himself. Those who were standing near Paul said, "How dare you insult God's high priest?" So the person who ordered that was the official high priest. Paul replied, "Brothers, I did not realize that he was the high priest, for it is written, 'Do not speak evil about the ruler of your people.'" Again, something that the left forget. Something goes wrong with the authorities or the police, and they completely lose it. This is not according to Scripture. There's other scriptures, of course, that I could quote as well, that God appoints the authorities to rule, to make decisions, to make things better for the people. Doesn't mean that governments can't be corrupt, can't be evil, can't do bad things. Don't lose sight of the fact that the government in Jesus' day was very cruel, very rough. Jesus does not say these things in ignorance or in stupidity. He experienced it himself, right through to the death on the cross. That's our example. We don't have the excuse to say, look, respect for authority, that's great, as long as they do the right thing. If they do the wrong thing, all bets are off. It just simply doesn't work that way, sorry. Each individual person, as they basically tend to go on a sort of left-leaning, let's be kind to everybody kind of approach, over time, their mistakes in their thinking become more and more toxic until either it becomes just so obvious to everybody around them that it's wrong, or that they themselves realise that it's wrong. Now, there are lifelong Democrats or lifelong left-leaning people that, they don't move away from that. Okay, that's great. But just in this little talk, I'm going to deal with some of those little toxic ways of thinking. I've dealt with a couple already. Heart means everything. Doesn't matter whether it's got practical problems or simply won't work. As long as your intentions are good, everything's going to work out. No, sorry, it doesn't work that way. The lack of authority must be embedded in your thinking. The justice, the narrow-minded justice aspect, come on. That is absolutely dangerous. And for a Christian particularly, because that's absolutely fundamental. And the best people to be walking this planet to deal with people's failure is a Christian, because our religion is based on people's failure. We simply cannot live up to God's standard. We need a solution to our own evil, to our own sin. Christians know this. Sometimes we forget it for ourselves. There is a tendency in human nature to try to be perfect, to try to pass ourselves off as perfect, to forget what the gospel is, that it's a way to God, that God himself has given us a free gift of grace. Grace is the missing component. Justice is just not going to cut it. It's just not going to. You're fooling yourself if you think anything different. What happens on the left side of things is that people want to support the underprivileged and things, which is great. The Bible has many verses about doing the same thing. But again, it can just snowball into some bad thinking. And part of the way it does that is that you start dealing with different marginalised groups. Simply, there's just too many groups for people to consider everybody. So what typically happens is that left-leaning people adopt a particular group of people and they centre on those. It can be the poor, it can be minorities, immigrants, refugees, all sorts of different things. But typically people will try to specialise in their thinking with one particular thing. And as time goes by, the only way they can sustain that is they develop this idea that their particular adopted group can't do any wrong. The evil, the corruption is out there. Their particular group is excluded from that. I should mention some other groups, so the LGBT type stuff, the sexism type stuff, all that kind of stuff. So whatever group you're talking about, this is the snowballing danger in their thinking. And again, it's fundamental to Christian belief that we all share this humanity. We all share the good and the bad. We have successes, we have potential, we have God's image as part of us, We also have the failure. We also have the corruption. I would say one of the central ways that comes out through the Bible repeatedly is the simple quoted declaration by God. He says, "Vengeance is mine, says the Lord." But he basically says that mankind is excluded from utilising vengeance. That is exclusively his domain, because we just simply cannot cope with it. We cannot, meter out justice with moderation. We tend to overdo it. We punish people without restraint. We riot without restraint. Every few years we get this sense of injustice about something that's happened, something that's bad. Okay, it's bad. But the reaction to it is completely off the charts. And it is not governed by any moral constraint. It's a problem. Think about it. The world is watching and they don't like it. Another way that shows itself is a fairly recent, terminology that the left is using, which is truth to power. That gives it away. In other words, the left says, I can say whatever truth I like, I can be as cruel as I like, as long as to a powerful person, because they're the evil, they're the corrupt ones. We are okay. We don't need the truth. They need the truth. It's got the same poisonous attitude. So the rights and the wrongs are not distributed across the planet. It's us and them. Good, bad. No. And another toxic way of thinking is this idea of changing the world. Whatever small thing bothers you, it's the world's fault. The world has to change. Some of these things are being used in big ways with climate change and things. And there are some times where larger groups of people need to come together and cooperate to change some things. Okay, that's great. But it should not be a way of life that every little thing that bothers you day in and day out means that the world is wrong and things won't get better for you personally until the world changes. Sometimes 180 degrees from where they are right now. If you think that way, it's not the world that has the problem, it's you. If you get up every day and walk, as soon as you open that front door, if you just see racism up and down the street, or you see sexism up and down the street, or patriarchy, or toxic masculinity, or whatever it is you want to think, if that's your guiding force all day, every day, it's not the world that has the problem. It's you. And what's worse, you're not seeing these kind of attitudes in yourself. I could talk almost endlessly about different Bible verses that say these kinds of things. I won't bore you with them. And we're starting to get to the end of it. I don't want to make this a very long video. In fact, I'm trying my best to just stick to the point, because what I should say is that this video is really my inaugurational YouTube presence. I'm looking forward to having specific videos in the future about all sorts of kind of different topics, but I don't want to get sidetracked. Just trying to stick to the point, and for all our sakes, and just try to make it as crisp as I can. I mentioned this personal toxic development throughout life for an individual. This also happens on a party-wide group basis, that as people group together, take on this leftist way of thinking and these toxic, bad way of thinking, year by year, it just becomes more toxic if it's not restrained. That's what's driving this WalkAway movement at the moment, that people are just absolutely, the left has just got so ridiculous that people are just fed up and they just can't sustain it anymore. It's beyond a joke. And that's what happened with me. And I'm not the only one. It's a movement over there. Okay, now I'll start to wrap up. This is really the sort of final point now, and this is, in a way, the cruelest point. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm titling this The Information Time Bomb, and I want to explain why that is. As I mentioned, there's divisions with people with a message like this, WalkAway movement. It creates divisions in families and friends. So many people, unfortunately, have long-term friends who they just will not speak to them again because they have come out as walking away from the leftish movement. This has happened to me. It may happen to me even more now that I'm making this video. There may even be people in the Christian community who think the same way, but it's happened inside my own family. I'm estranged from my own children for a number of years. And part of the reason why I'm making this video, the YouTube has got enough people giving their own attitudes. My motivation is a little bit beyond that. I'm creating an informational time bomb for the future, for my own family, that one day they may see this and it might just hurry along their way of thinking. It's been a very tough message, and I've said this to my son, that what you hold dear right now, my children are grown up, I should just say, and it's a tough message to say to somebody. What you're holding dear as your own beliefs right now, it could be that in 20 or 30 years' time, you're going to look back and your attitudes will have moved substantially, maybe even 180 degrees from what you think right now. It's a tough message, I understand that. But as a father, I can't just walk away. And if I can lay down some logic or some ways of thinking that can just speed that process up in my own children or in other people, then I think I've done a good thing. Until that 20 or 30 years is up, though, they're not going to like it. So in that sense, it's an informational time bomb. I'm going to leave it out there on the internet. I don't know whether they're going to see it until then, but one day they're going to pick it up and maybe it's just going to make a positive difference to my own family, but perhaps to other people out there also. But again, as I say, this WalkAway movement is a big movement. There's a lot of people getting involved and feeling it and walking away. So I'm just not one person. I'm just one of many. It's a happening scene, man. Yeah. No, and I've done more than just have a whinge. I'm trying to give you actual little nuggets that will just sit in your brain, even if you don't agree with me, it will sit in your brain and just gnaw at you until finally you yield to some logic. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Ciao.